This conference will now be recorded.
Hi guys, good morning.
Good morning, Vijay.
Right, we'll start. It's 7:01. We'll wait for a couple of minutes, just 2-3 minutes. I think 1 or 2 people has to join. We'll wait for another 2 minutes and then we'll start. Okay, guys, we'll start. Okay, so we were discussing yesterday about using the PowerShell for Azure resources or Azure resource deployment, right? So we did cover a few items within that. We did see, a few items like what are those things that which are needed? That's what we had seen, right? PowerShell, latest version. Of course, latest version is 6. So just check if you have that. If not, you just can go and install 6 or even if you have 5, most of the things will work. Okay, and then check for the execution policy, right? Check for the execution policy, right? Execution policy, right? You use a command called get hyphen execution policy, right? So this is a command that which you use, right? And then if that is set to some restricted or some other, then change the execution policy to remote signed, right? Change the execution policy, right? Remote signed. So what this does is this basically allows you to run your PowerShell commands, right? Otherwise you will get error messages because you have that execution policy restricted, right? So what is the command you use here? You use, instead of get, you use set, right? That's a command that which you will be using. Instead of get, you use set execution policy, right? So now once we are done with this, then what we need to do is, because we are using the Azure related, we want Azure commands to be executed through PowerShell. By default, these will not be there, right? So what we need to do is install Azure modules, right? Now use a command called install module, install hyphen module, right? And hyphen name and name of the module, that is AC, right? So that's what you will be doing. Now, once you have this, what do you call, modules installed, then you are all set to use the Azure related command lines, right? So that's what we had seen yesterday when we started this session, right? So we'll continue from there and move on and see a couple of examples, and then we'll move on to the networking part of Azure. Okay, so let's move ahead with the other stuff within the PowerShell. Now we did install the modules yesterday, right? So how do I find whether the module is installed or not? There's a command called get hyphen installed module, right? And the module name and the module name, then you'll get the version of the module that which is installed. Now if you have latest version than this, right, so there are two versions, one is 2.1 and 2.2. Now if you have older version, you can go and update the modules using update hyphen module. There's a command that can be used and updated to the latest version. So always check whether you have a latest version of the Azure PowerShell module or not. If not, then you can go and update it using the command, right? So this is how you can check what version of the module is installed, if Azure module is really installed on your machine or not, right? So that is another important thing. Now I have all this set. Now I need to connect it to Azure, right? Now what is the command that which I'll use to connect to the Azure is connect hyphen AC account, right? So this is the command that which we will be using. Now which basically takes me through to an Internet Explorer, asking username and password, right? Now if you're using a server operating system, you may get an issue while running this command. Reason being, there will be a Internet Explorer security settings, right? ISEC, right? So you need to disable them so that you don't see any issues while using this command. So because it's a desktop operating system, I don't see any issues. Whereas if you are using the same command on a server, you see some issues. So just disable those security settings on Internet Explorer. Okay, so then you will be able to launch without any issues, right? So I will be using my subscribe username and password, and then you will get into you will get authenticated and you are into Azure, your subscription, right? So that's what it will show. Now there are few basic commands that which we had seen, so we will stick only to basics for now, and once we are done with virtual networks, then we will include virtual network and virtual machine creation and other stuff into a single code, and then see how exactly that works, right? So but for now what we will be sticking to is the basic stuffs that whatever we had seen so far. Okay, now what are those things that which, as I think we had seen this, there are certain basic commands. You want to know the resource groups. See, all the commands that what you see here is nothing but a verb hyphen noun. So that's how we need to treat any Azure command, right? So get or new, right? Create, remove, right? So there will be something like the way how it is structured is a verb hyphen noun, right? So all the Azure commands will be, you know, AZ and then the command actually, right? So if I want to get a resources, then I can use get AZ resource, right? You can just use tab, then it will give me all the list of resources which are there in across different resource groups, right? Now if I just need only resource groups, then you can go and use resource groups. So that will give me the list of resource groups. So I have 4 resource groups, right? Now that's how you can get the resource groups, VMs, right? Then within VM, again, there are multiple commands within that. So we can also use all those commands to get more details, like virtual machine ID. Sometimes to execute certain commands, you need virtual machine ID, right? Now, so those things will, as we go on, we will look into that. But just for this class, let us only stick to the basics, okay? Now, I just want to create a virtual machine using the Azure PowerShell, right? So before I create a virtual machine, so what are the prerequisites? I need to have a what you call resource group in place, right? So let me go and create a resource group, and then we will create a virtual machine. So what is the command to create a resource group? New hyphen AZ, right? Resource group, right? So use PowerShell ISE. That will be easy for you to kind of right, write this code, right? Now this has got multiple parameters, right? If you press hyphen, it should give you the list of parameters or you know, items that which need to be feeded into this particular what you call command. There could be some optional, there are a few mandatory things, right? So let us stick to the mandatory things that whatever are needed, right? So name of the resource group is needed. I'll put as demo resource group, and then I'll put the location as, right, central US, right? I'll put the location as central US, right? Now if you want, you can use other parameters as well, right? Now you can also use what if, which basically gives you what exactly this command is going to do. You can try it, right? So this again useful stuff. Try using those things. So this is enough for me to create a resource group, right? I am not specifying the subscription because I have only one subscription. If you have multiple subscriptions, you need to specify to which resource group this particular, to which subscription this resource group is going to get tagged, right? So that is, we'll be seeing in our future, you know, when we create a virtual machines across multiple subscriptions, right? So this is the command that which we can use to create a resource group. Now, so once you have a resource group, then we have that resource group, then we can go and create a virtual machine, right? Now, what is the command to create a virtual machine? New AZ VM, simple, straightforward, right? New AZ VM. Like any resource, this will also have a name. But before I go and put the name of the virtual machine, this virtual machine should sit in a resource group, right? That's what we are going to put, the resource group. What is the resource group you are creating here is what you will be giving, right? Right? And then I'll go and put the name of the virtual machine, right? So how do I put the name? Just go and put, let me put this down so that it will be easy for us to read, right? Hyphen name, right? I'll put as demo VM, right? Demo VM. Then, so you have resource group, you have name, the another mandatory field is location, right? Location, right? The other mandatory field is location. Now, what is the location you want to select? Let me put it in the same location, wherever it is, wherever the resource group is, right? Now, these are enough for me to create a virtual machine. If I want to give other details, I can give. But you, what is that subnet it is putting? What is the virtual network it is trying to pick? Or what are those ports that it will open? All those things are the default ones that what it will pick, right? Now, if you want to add additional things, we can always go and add the additional stuff as well. For example, virtual network name, right? If you have a virtual network already created, you can go and put virtual network name, right? And subnet name, hyphen subnet name, right? Hyphen subnet name. And you have, let us say, rules that which are already defined in your network security group, which acts as a firewall. Then you can also go and set up, right, security group name. You can also go and include security group name, right? And if you want to put some open ports, you can also put open ports. That's where you are selecting, right? 3389 and so on. Likewise, we can go and add additional things based on our requirement, right? Now, for me, what I'm going to do is I'll just go and use these 3-4 lines, right, for today. Now, I didn't specify the username and password, right? So when you spin the VM, what it does is it will ask me the username and password. Or you can also use a command called as get-credentials. Get-credentials, you can read that into a variable, right? You can read that into variable. Then what it will happen is it will ask you the credentials. If I execute only this line, then it should, oh, let me cancel this.
Vijay, this editor, actually PowerShell ISC editor, it will be automatically, it comes with Windows, or like we need to get this package?
No, that will come with Windows itself. When you it comes with the operating system,
Okay.
no need of you installing it, right? So if you can use other tools as well. There's something called as Visual Studio Code. Okay, so that is also a very good tool. If you are writing code across different what you call languages or this thing, then that can be used. But PowerShell is good enough. That is also easy to manage and easy to read kind of thing. The other tool, our Visual Studio Code, you can also look into that, or Notepad++ and other tools are also there. So you can use any of the tools, and that should not be a problem. But this one we will get it by default. Okay.
Default. Okay.
Yeah. So what this command has done is it is reading the values of your credentials, right? So that's how this command can also be useful. So if you are creating multiple machines and you do not have to enter every time, right? So those cases you can go and use this command to read it into a variable, and then use that particular credentials across the script to feed the credentials during the creation of the virtual machine itself, right? Okay, so let us go and, but I'm removing this because I don't want to use this now. That's the reason I commented it. Just go and execute the script, right? So this basically goes and creates a virtual machine, right? Goes and creates a virtual. For some reason this is, let us try to put this in here. right? So it will ask you the username and password of your virtual machine that it wants to create, right? Right, so it creates, and you can use a command called -job. Okay, so there is another switch called as -job, which basically runs at the background, and then you can work on the other stuff as well, right? So now it is kind of creating, and will not be able to do any other stuff, but you can use as job, right? -as job, then it will run. You can do multiple activities within the same console as well, right? So that is another thing that which you can use. Okay, so this how you can play around with this. As I said, it's, you have multiple you know, examples here, right? You can just play around with those things and have your own configuration. There's enough help here for us to go and look into what exactly we need, right? So I suggest having a look on these things, and then you'll get more information than what we are seeing here. Okay, so that is the basic stuff about the virtual machine creation. But what we do in, once we are done with the virtual networks, what we have to do is we'll create a single code which creates your virtual network interface cards, and then the virtual machines, and then network security groups, and all those things we can do it in a single code. Okay, so let us do that once we are done with our virtual networks, which will be kind of two classes, today, tomorrow, and maybe sometime day after tomorrow as well, which is a huge concept, right? So let this go on. Okay, so let this go on. We'll come back to our other topics. So what we had seen so far is about the virtual machines, right? So most of the stuff that whatever we had done so far is virtual machines. And what we haven't seen is deployment of multiple virtual machines and other stuff that we will be doing it as we move on. There are other couple of concepts which are related to the virtual machines, which is called as virtual machine scale set, right? Virtual machine scale set, which is nothing but scaling your VMs, right? Scaling your VMs. Now, when we talk about scaling, I'll just explain you a few things before I forget. Okay, scaling is of two types, right? What are those? One is called horizontal scaling, and the second one is vertical scaling, right? These are the terms that which we use, right? Now, what is this horizontal scaling and what is this vertical scaling? Vertical scaling is nothing but you are increasing the resources of your virtual machine, right? So resizing the virtual machine. That's what we had seen, right? How do we resize your virtual machine within the VM properties? Whereas horizontal scaling is you have a pool of servers, you are adding additional set of servers to that, right? That is called as horizontal scaling, right? This is called as scale out, right? This is called as scale up, right? Scale out, scale up. And when you decrease it, this is called as scale down, and then this is called as scale in. So these are few terms that which we should be knowing, right? It's good when we talk. If we talk in these lines, it will be very good, right? So virtual machine scale set is nothing but you are adding additional VMs to the existing pool of VMs. So that we will be seeing as a part of one of our classes. Okay, so all these things are pending for virtual machines. So we'll come back to the virtual machines once we are done with the networking part. Okay, now today we'll start with Azure networking. Okay, Azure networking or network, right? There are multiple components within this virtual network. Within this virtual Azure network, one of them is virtual networks, right? Virtual networks. And you have something called as subnets. And you have NSG. NSG is network security groups, right? Network security group, which is nothing but a software firewall, right? Within the Azure. And you also have something called as load balancer. Load balancer. And traffic manager. And then You have routing, right? You have routing. And then we'll also discuss DNS, right? And then point to site, site to site configuration, something called as express route. Now these are the different components which are will be covered as a part of this networking. Okay, so it's quite huge. But what we'll do is we'll be splitting this into two parts, and then after few parts, then we'll again switch back to our VMs, and then we'll again switch back to our network. So that's how our course will go. Okay. So for today, what we'll do is we'll go with virtual networks, subnets. Okay. Network security group will cover tomorrow, which means Monday, and then load balancer, traffic manager, routing, and the DNS. Point to site is a VPN solution. Site to site is connectivity between your on-prem and what do you call it as Azure. And express route is also a similar solution, which will be a theory, right? Because we'll not be able to get that express route. We have to get it from your service provider. Okay. So let us go on with virtual networks. Right. Let us go on with virtual networks and subnets. Now, what is a virtual network? Right, and why do we need why do we need a network in stuff? Now if you talk about a network in the real-time environment, I mean, if you take about when I say real-time, I'll just change that word. In your on-prem environment, what you do, you get your switches, routers, and then you configure virtual LANs and segregate your environment based on your requirement, right? So that's how you will set it up. Similarly, Azure has a network component, a feature which is called as virtual network. Now what this virtual network does is it enables you communication between different virtual networks, that is one, to your on-prem, to the internet, and so on. So even if you want to enable a communication between two devices within Azure environment, you should have a virtual network in place, right? So you can call virtual network as a network solution which basically allows communication between different components within Azure, or even to the internet, or to your on-prem, or whatever, right? So that is what a virtual network is. Now each virtual network will have a name as by default, any virtual, any resource, and it will also have something called as address prefix. Address prefix. Now what is this address prefix? This is a little different when you compare to the on-prem stuff. Now when you create a virtual network, you are telling Azure that okay, this virtual network will hold an IP range of so and so. It can be your 10.x, or it can be your 192 series, or anything for that matter. So you are basically defining your virtual network address space. That's what you call it as, right? Address space, right? Now this address space will be used by different scopes which will be part of this particular virtual network, right? The address space can be used by different entities within this virtual network. Now what are those entities that which will be part of the virtual network? A virtual network can be further divided into something called as subnets. Something called as subnets. Now this subnet will share a subset of or a complete IP range of your virtual network. Okay. Now if you have around 256 IP addresses here, let us think so, 256 IP addresses, the subnet, which is a subset of this virtual network, can either use all these 256 IP addresses or a part of this particular what do you call it as IP addresses that whatever are available. So what it means is one virtual network can have multiple subnets, right? One virtual network will have multiple subnets. And again, each subnet will also have an address space, which is nothing but a subset of address space of virtual network, right? Now, when you are creating a virtual network, you define the address space. When you are creating a subnet, you are making sure that you are picking the address range which is part of your virtual network address range, right? Now, we'll see that how does that will be and all those things when we go to the portal itself. But just for our understanding, we need to understand these things. Now, a virtual network will also help you to kind of isolate your Azure environment. So you are attaining an isolation here. What does this mean? If I have two virtual networks, virtual network 1 and virtual network 2, by default, they will not be able to communicate with each other, which means each virtual network is isolated with the other virtual network within the Azure subscription, right? Now I have three virtual networks, none of them will communicate with each other by default. That's how you are attaining the isolation. You can also attain a segmentation, right? How are you attaining the segmentation? Dividing your virtual networks into multiple subnets. That's how you are segmenting the entire address space, right? Now, what we need to understand is about isolation across the virtual networks means no communication, but within the virtual network, the subnets will be able to communicate with each other. So what it means is there is no restrictions when it comes to the communication within the virtual network. So when you create when you design your network solution, right? So you need to take all these factors into consideration, right? Now let us say that you have only one virtual network. You have only one virtual network. Let us think so. And you have multiple subnets, n number of subnets. Now you want to restrict the communication between the subnets. As we are saying that there is no default restriction, but we can put a restriction, and that's where your network security group will come into picture. What is network security group? It is a firewall related stuff, right? So you define rules, what subnet will communicate with what, which subnet will communicate with which subnet, and on what port, and so on, right? So that's what you will define within the network security group. Okay, so your network security groups will be assigned to subnets, right? So a subnet will get a network security group if you want to kind of restrict the traffic, and that network security group will define what is that the traffic that need to be allowed or that need to be dropped, right? So what we had understood so far is what a virtual network is. It is a network component which basically allows communication between different resources in Azure, right? Now it allows you an isolation. The way how it is being attained is the default way it is designed is so, right? By default, virtual networks will not communicate with each other. To enable it, we have to do something called as virtual network peering, or we have to use some gateways, right? So we'll see that in one of our classes as we move on. And each virtual network will get an address range, address space, which tells what is the address space the resources which are part of that virtual network will use. And each virtual network will have one or more subnets, and these subnets will use the IP range what you define within your virtual network, which means a subnet will have a subset of IP range what you defined at your virtual network level, right? And by default, virtual machines within by default, subnets within the virtual network will be able to communicate with each other, and there is no restriction as such. Okay. Now, if you want to enable the restriction, if you want to put something in place, you will be tagging a network security group by defining those rules that whatever are needed to drop or to allow the traffic between the subnets. Okay. Now, let me get into a diagram. Okay. Right. So VNet 1 and VNet 2. Okay. VNet, right? And this VNet 1 can have multiple subnets. Right? Multiple subnets. This will also have its own subnets. Right? Right? So by default, these two will not communicate with each other. There is no communication. That's how you are attaining the isolation. Okay. Let us go back to our portal and see what are those options and what do we need to do to create a virtual network. Okay. So you can go to the virtual network from here itself, right? You can see an option within the favorites, or you can also go and create from here virtual networks. It will take you the virtual network blade. Okay, so either way you will be landing into the same location. Now add. Right, so when you click on add, you can see the default items that which are picked. Right now, as like any resource, as like any resource in Azure, it will also have a name. Right now, by default it is picking an address space. Now what is that address space it is picking? It is picking 10.1.0.0/16. Now what is this /16? What is this /16? Right, this is nothing but, we call it as CIDR format. Right, we call it as CIDR, CIDR. What does it stands for? It stands for classless interdomain routing. Right now, if you remember, if you are from little bit of administration and network background, so we have learned different classes of IP addresses and ranges and so on. Right now, this classless interdomain will help you to kind of define a network solution without using the classes. Right, so that's what it says. There is a good amount of theory around that. I would suggest to go and read it. I'll not be covering that entire stuff here, but what is the format that what we use here is classless. Now if you are using a classless, then you'll put /16, /8, /24 and so on. Based on whatever the number you put, the number of IP addresses ranges will change. The number of IP address you will get will change. Right, if there is a change in the range, there's also change in the number of IP addresses you will get. Right, so there are quite a few calculators which we can use it. You can just go and look for that, but for our class, if you're using /16, what does it mean? That you are getting an IP address as, right, 65,536 IP addresses, that which you are getting for this particular virtual network. Right now, I can use this entire range of IP addresses for my subnet, which means from 10.1.0.0 till 10.1.255.255, within this range, I can go and use my subnets to define you know, the IP address range between this and this, right? So that's what, you know, if you are using /16, you will get, right? Now, if you use /24, this will further change, right? If you use /8, it won't allow because you don't have that range of IP address space, right? Now you can use /12, then also it will not, right? So you have to just go and look at what is that address space range that which you need by going to the calculator, and then you can define that address space. Basically, if you are a networking guy and you work on switches, routers, and other stuff, it is easy for you. Otherwise, you will rely on your network team to get these details, and then you create the virtual network based on the IP address ranges provided by your network team. Okay. Now, because we have this 10.1.0.0, which is speaking by default, then I'll leave it as it is, and I'll also leave that as /16, right? Then let me go and create a virtual network. Now, like any resource, it also got a subscription, and it also should get into a, what do you call it, as resource group. I'll put that in a demo resource group. And what is the region you want to put this in, right? So let us put that in Central US. And a subnet name. Now, by default, when you create a virtual network, you will be creating one subnet at least, right? We'll call it as subnet 1. Now, as I said, this subnet will be picking an IP address range from this one, right? So what is that it is taking? It is taking 10.1.0.0/24. If you want, you can change it. So it takes from 10.1.0.0 to 10.1.0.255, which means all the resources part of this particular subnet will get an IP address from this range, which is nothing but 256, right? We'll come back to that. There are a few other things that which needs to be discussed around subnets. Once we create this, we'll go to the settings and then we'll discuss further. So these are the basic settings. So from this console, from here, you can create only one subnet. Once you create a virtual network, you can add additional subnets to the virtual network because you don't have an option here. So let me go and create a virtual network, right? So it creates a virtual network with the range that whatever you had defined, and there will be a subnet for that. Right, your virtual network is created, which is VNet1, right? Now, if you go and look at the settings of this particular virtual network, let me go to the address space within the settings. You see the address space that whatever you had defined. Of course, you can add additional address range as well. You can add, so one VNet can have multiple address ranges also, right? That is also possible. Now, this VNet has got subnets, right? Where do I find it? You have an option here called subnets. Now, there is only one subnet that which is created, right? And that is the range that what it is we selected. And what you see here is 251 IP addresses, which is a reduction in number. There are few addresses which are reserved by your Azure. Okay, so those addresses will be used by Azure for their internal purposes, and they will not be assigned to the virtual machines. That's the reason there is only 251, whereas you should get 255 IP addresses, right? So we'll see what are those that which will be reserved when we create a virtual machine. Then we'll see from where the assignment of the IP addresses starts, and from there we'll discuss how many of them are reserved and for what. Okay, so let us just understand that there are few IP addresses which will be reserved. Okay, now I want to create multiple subnets. Then what I need to do, I need to go and click on new subnet by clicking the plus button, and then you can go and create one more subnet, right? Subnet 2, right? And then it picks the range by default. If you want to change it, you can change it. You can see 251 plus 5 reserved IP addresses, right? There are 5 IP addresses that which are reserved. It's creating the second subnet. Likewise, you can create multiple subnets within the virtual network. Okay, so I'll pause a little bit here. If you have any questions, we'll take.
So so by default, we cannot create in different classes, right? The subnets, they all should be in the same class.
Right. So whatever the class your virtual network is in, right? So that's what defines what your subnets will have, right? So if you want that, if you want to have here a 10 dot and then a virtual network in 192 dot, you can create 2 virtual networks separately. That can be done, and then you have to just put a gateway or there's something called as virtual network peering, which you have to create a connection between 2 networks, virtual networks. I mean, you have to create two ways, right? Not one way. If you want one-way communication, you can create one way also. And then there will be communication that which will be established between the virtual networks. You see it, right? Peering here. That we'll see tomorrow. How do we use this option and create a peering between virtual networks?
Okay.
Right. So likewise, what we can do is we can create multiple virtual networks and subnets. There are a couple of other things that which I just want to show. Let me go to the subnet, and then we'll create subnet 3. Right. So by default, what is that? It is taking /24, which is nothing but you are getting 256. What do you call it as IP addresses, right? Now, what is the minimum amount of IP addresses that can be used? So this is what /29 is what you can use. So what you are getting 3 IP addresses, which means you are getting 8 IP addresses, right? If you use /29, out of which 3 you will be using and 5 will be reserved. If you go beyond this, then you will not be able to create any other IP addresses. So /29 is the minimum number of IP addresses a subnet can have. Okay, so that is one thing that which is important, which we should be knowing. Okay, now what we will do is to just simulate the lab, we will create we have 15 minutes time. I'm not sure we'll be able to complete this. We'll create 2 different virtual networks. Okay, so that's how our lab will be, right? Create virtual network 1 and 2, and then create subnets and put virtual machines within this, right? That's what we will be looking in our lab, right? So, and then if you want to put some rules between the subnets, then we'll put when we discuss network security groups tomorrow, and then restrict the communication between the subnets. And then if you want to allow the communication between these 2 virtual networks, what we'll do is we'll use virtual network peering, right? By default, they will not be able to communicate. Then we'll create a VNet peering, and then we will simulate and see if the communication is established or not, right? And you can also use gateway here between these 2, which is nothing but a router, right? So you can also use a gateway to enable communication between virtual networks. That also will be seen. Okay. if you have any questions, we will take. I am afraid today if I start, I'll not be able to complete this entire demonstration. So what we need to do is we'll take few questions if you have anything, and then we'll start this entire lab on Monday, and then we'll finish this entire lab and then network security groups on Monday. Okay, so otherwise we will be in between. I think we'll be leaving that in between. If you have any questions, you can ask.
So, Vijay, when you're saying network security group, that means like it is a DMZ environment. That's what it is.
See, DMZ is you can create a DMZ environment, right? So, what is a DMZ? A highly restricted area, right? So
Yes.
that's all, right? So, I mean, this particular, what do you have to restrict? You have a firewall, correct? That's all. And the same thing you are doing here. You, instead of firewall, you are using a network security group, right? And you put that between your virtual networks, or you can put that between your internet and your VNet, and you can write certain rules, right? What needs to be dropped, what needs to be allowed, and so on, right? So we'll be seeing that tomorrow.
Okay.
And then where do we can tag the network security groups, and what is that priority, which takes what, where are the locations you can assign a network. So you can assign it to a subnet, you can assign it to a network interface card of the VM, and so on, right? So a few interesting things we'll try to simulate that in our lab and see how they will work and for better understanding. Right. So connected devices also you can see here. If you have any devices within the subnet, you can all see all these devices, whatever are connected and so on. Right. So DNS is also another important thing. Tomorrow we'll discuss that as well. Any other questions? Any other questions? I did promise to share few documents. I couldn't share that yesterday. I'll send that to Lakshmi today so that he'll send it across to you guys. Yeah, so I'll do that today. Any questions, guys? Okay, so if no questions, then we'll catch up on Monday. Then we'll resume with our network security groups and virtual networks, and then we'll move to network security groups. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thanks for, yeah, please.
Yeah, don't forget to give that link so we can prepare in the weekend, right? So
Definitely. I'll do it. I'll do it today. Yeah.
okay, sure.
Sorry. Yesterday I couldn't, do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no
we'll
worries.
catch up on Monday. Have a great day and then great weekend as well. Bye.
Hi, thank you.